Welcome back to Days of Our Diplomacy, where the writer's room has indeed lost the plot of the dumb soap opera known as Geopolitics on Earth, all while discussion of a significant problem that Iran is about to encounter remains quiet, even though it connects back to a strategy that Ukraine has been using against Russia for the better part of a year now. Even though it helps explain why the United States has not restarted kinetic action against Iran, and even though it will have long-lasting effects on global oil markets. Yes, the United States and Iran were supposed to negotiate in Pakistan once more, but then no one ever got on a plane to actually have those conversations, and then Trump announced that there would be no negotiations, and the combination ceasefire/blockade will continue for the time being. Unfortunately, much of the narrative for what has happened over the last week misses the problem that is causing the conflict to continue. The focus seems to conflate the symptom of the disease with the disease itself. The war is continuing not because of the various threats that the sides are lobbing on social media and through more traditional channels. The war is continuing not because the parties lack trust in the negotiating process. The war is continuing not because the parties are refusing to meet in Pakistan to negotiate a settlement. Rather, all of this is happening because there is no resolution that both parties are willing to accept, given what they believe about the situation. And once we stop wasting time following the hour-to-hour verbal threats being made, and start accepting that not negotiating is, itself, a form of negotiating, we might then understand what the heck is happening in at least one corner of the world of chaos that we currently live in. So, to preview where we are going today, we will begin by catching up on what we know has happened over the past week or so. Then we will jump over to the more speculative side of things, and try to understand what is happening with the bargaining frictions between the United States and Iran. Finally, we will discuss a significant issue that Iran will soon have to confront, and what that means for the war more broadly. But let's zoom out for a second and discuss the observable facts of what is happening. The war is not over, and I do not mean that in some technical way, where a ceasefire is not a formal end of a conflict. I do not mean that in a legal manner, where a blockade is an act of war. I mean that war is, broadly speaking, a costly process by which two actors settle some political dispute. As compared to 2 weeks ago, we have swapped the traditional war process of death and destruction with pure economic coercion. But at the end of the day, it is still a costly process that will result in some sort of political outcome. Or, to paraphrase Clausewitz, economic sanctions are war by other means. Specifically, that process for now consists of a freeze, more or less, of traffic running through the Strait of Hormuz. On the US side, it is a blockade of traffic going in and out of Iranian ports. And technically, the blockade is closer to Oman. An important thing to note the next time you see Iranian disinformation on the number of ships that have transited the strait. Technically, many have. And while technically correct is the best kind of correct, it is economically meaningless if they cannot escape the broader Gulf region. On the Iranian side, it is a threat to fire at ships transiting the strait without paying some kind of protection fee, though the rules there are not particularly clear. Plus, Iran has been actively firing at vessels and detaining them. Suffice it to say that, whatever is happening there, the situation is a mess. So when Trump announced that the ceasefire would continue despite canceled talks in Islamabad, and some let out a sigh of relief, I believe the popular phrase was that it was Taco Tuesday, my reaction has been a bit more tepid. Ceasefire? Perhaps, especially from the perspective of civilians in the broader Gulf region. Ceasefire for the world economy? Not so much. You know, the last time that we directly looked at Iran news, Trump was just announcing the blockade. I mentioned that it was possible that markets would respond positively to the declaration, calculating that the additional coercive pressure would put Iran in a bind, thereby resulting in a more rapid end of hostilities. Well, the market indeed reacted in that manner. Iran, however, did not. The market has correspondingly corrected its assessment, bringing oil prices back up. And that wraps up where we are currently. Now we can shift to understanding why this is all happening. And the short answer is that, as far as I can tell, the parties do not have a shared vision of what would happen if they continue to play out this game. It seemed like this was not the case only a handful of days ago. After the ceasefire's first hiccup with Israel continuing operations in Lebanon, it appeared that Netanyahu's second front was the primary stopping block. If that ended, then the strait would reopen, and everything would go back to normal-ish. The exact details would still take a lot of time to hash out, of course. That is particularly true on technical topics like Iran's nuclear program, how to compensate for the losses that Iran would incur on the purely civilian side of it, which third parties might facilitate the continued operations of its power plants, and so forth. But with both parties agreeing on the big picture items, the world economy could go back to normal, while diplomats did their diplomatic thing in Islamabad and elsewhere. Where things seemed to fall apart was on Sunday, when Trump announced that Iran would reopen the strait, and the United States would continue the blockade against ships entering Iranian ports until a more detailed agreement could be drawn up on Tuesday. It is unclear whether Iran ever agreed to this, just as it is unclear who exactly would be making that decision in Tehran to begin with. Either way, Iran quickly dismissed this agreement and continued to impose whatever you want to call its closure of the strait. We therefore have reached an impasse, where it seems that both sides believe that they can outlast each other, and so a meaningful negotiation on more technical issues like nuclear proliferation is pointless. The lack of negotiations happening in Pakistan is therefore a form of negotiations by other means. Holding back a settlement, and enduring the costs along the way, is a credible signal of that party's resolve, and may eventually pave the way for a settlement later down the line. The most interesting evolution that we have seen here so far is Trump's complete lack of regard for US public opinion on the matter. The war was unpopular from the start, but the White House's actions over the first month plus genuflected in the electorate's direction, trying to minimize disruption to energy markets. Quite the task when the thrust of the action resulted in the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz. Still, the affordability crisis weighed on the administration's decision-making. Fast forward to the beginning of the US counter-blockade, and the White House has shown much less regard for those concerns. Why there is that lack of concern is an interesting question. Maybe it is because, as a lame duck president, he truly does not care. Maybe he thinks that this will ultimately work, and MAGA loyalists will eventually come back to him. Maybe he is benefiting by having Congress and the media's attention diverted from a separate set of files. Or maybe he is just projecting strength that he does not have. Either way, Trump's new disposition has given the United States newfound economic leverage over Iran. However, the "or maybe he is just projecting" part is also raising questions in Tehran whether this plan is sustainable, or less of a taco situation and more of a techo situation. Trump eventually chickens out. Again, the only way to deduce the truth is to force Trump to pay the costs associated with continuing the economic conflict. The problem for Iran is that trying to sort out the truth is also costly for the country in the interim. And that takes us to our final point for today, regarding exactly the types of costs that Iran will have to incur to learn that missing information. For an answer, we must fly back to Kharg Island, the center of Iran's oil export industry, with some civilian support sections of the island giving way to the much more critical oil infrastructure. And this time, we are not even discussing the military options that the United States has available there. Under normal circumstances, Iran pumps oil to Kharg Island, where the waters are deep enough for massive tankers to fill up and ship out. Like any other economically efficient operation, Iran does not have a ton of excess storage for crude oil. Anything that just sits in a stationary tank is like money sitting under a mattress. And when we are talking about billions of dollars, you really want your money to be invested, or at least accruing interest. Iran has some storage capacity, of course, because it needs to smooth against random incidents that can arise when a tanker or two suffers from a mishap. What Iran cannot handle is a systemic problem affecting all tankers at once, say a blockade of the strait. Like everything else in the war, exactly how much longer Iran has left before it runs out of storage capacity is unclear. The White House is treating the problem as a matter of days. External analysts give it more like a 2-week window. Behold the irony that Trump is not using a 2-week deadline for something that actually has a 2-week deadline. Window framing aside, the problem runs deeper than just Iran overflowing with oil. It is that you will have to start shuttering wells to stop the flow. Unfortunately, you cannot just flip a switch to turn them on or off. A closed well takes time to restart, meaning that failure to reach an agreement within that 2-week period will have long-run consequences, both for Iran's pocketbook and the broader energy market. You may recall this was similar to Ukraine's plan for a Russian oil lockdown circa 8 months ago. Close the Russian refineries and exploit the natural dearth of Shadow Fleet tankers to strand Russia's wells without an outlet. Now we are observing a strategy that exclusively targets the export side of the industry. This may help explain why the United States did not jump back into a kinetic confrontation after the initial 2-week ceasefire expired. The latest reports continue to indicate that U.S. stockpiles are sapped. Half of the Patriots and THAADs are gone, as well as 30% of Tomahawks. Consequently, why send another Tomahawk to a target near Tehran when you can bleed them dry instead? Or at least that is the option that the White House presently wants to try. In turn, the next time that we might get meaningful new information is a little past that 2-week marker, when Iran has to figure out how to absorb a significant new source of costs. I know that lines on spreadsheets might not be as exciting as lines on maps, but that is where the war is heading. And it may not be the end of things either. If Iran can sustain itself for longer, then the Trump administration will be at a new crossroads about whether to re-engage kinetic actions. And brace yourself for the further turmoil that will arise when he posts on Truth Social, asking where European support is. So, what are our takeaway lines for today? This war still continues, even if the parties are no longer fighting it with bombs. There is a clear difference in opinion on who can last longer, which helps explain why the war is continuing by other means. And what we need to watch next is how Iran handles its oil tanks beginning to overflow. Speaking of overflowing, my playlist on big picture questions is getting there. 5 to 8 minutes each, exclusively focused on a topic suggested by a viewer. Check it out. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.